Okay, the entire world is basically holding its breath right now. We're diving into this highly anticipated, super high-stakes meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping over in Beijing. And in this explainer, we're unpacking a truly historic moment, guys. This is the first visit by a U.S. leader to China in nearly a decade. The global economy, international security, they are literally riding on this summit, especially since it got heavily delayed by the ongoing war involving Iran. There is just a massive amount of geopolitical weight resting on the shoulders of these two leaders today, and we are going to break down exactly what's happening.
To make sense of this massive geopolitical poker game, we're looking at 6 core pieces of the puzzle. First, the overarching mutual paradox between the US and China. Then the real flashpoints, tech and rare earths, the tariff tug-of-war, the Iran oil connection, and of course, the existential stakes surrounding Taiwan. Finally, we'll figure out what winning actually means for both of these guys.
All right, let's jump straight into the first piece of the puzzle, the mutual paradox.
So, why can't these two superpowers just walk away from each other? I mean, Washington and Beijing are locked in this fierce, escalating rivalry, right? They are totally competing for global dominance. But, and here is the crazy part, at the exact same time, they are completely 100% economically dependent on one another. The U.S. fundamentally relies on China's massive manufacturing machine to keep everyday goods affordable for us. And on the flip side, China absolutely needs American consumers to actually buy those goods. Plus, they desperately need access to U.S. tech, capital markets, and the stability of the U.S. dollar. They are literally tethered together.
Professor Salvador Centeno-Riquelme over at Leiden University actually hits the nail on the head here. He says, this is the paradox of U.S.-China rivalry. Each side wants greater autonomy, yet both remain tied to a structure of mutual dependence that neither can easily dismantle without hurting itself. It's the ultimate trap. Every single time one side tries to land a punch, they essentially end up punching their own economy. This mutual dependence, it is the absolute backdrop for every single disagreement at the summit.
Moving right along to our second topic, tech and rare earths. When it comes to the actual physical components driving our modern world, the tech sector is a massive battlefield. The U.S. has been actively tightening the screws, restricting advanced semiconductor exports to China, and even limiting the equipment used to make those chips. Washington is pretty open about the goal here. They want to hit the brakes on China's artificial intelligence and military development. By choking off the supply of the world's most advanced microchips, the U.S. is desperately trying to keep its technological edge. But remember that mutual dependence we just talked about? Yeah, offensive moves like this pretty much guarantee retaliation.
And boy, does Beijing have a trump card. 90%. Just let that number sink in for a second. China controls roughly 90% of global rare earth refining. These minerals are absolutely crucial. You literally cannot build the smartphone you're probably holding right now, or an electric vehicle or advanced military gear without them. So while the US might control the ultra-smart chip designs, China controls the dirt, the actual raw materials needed to manufacture our modern lives.
So with 90% of the market in their pocket, Beijing didn't just sit back and take the trip restrictions. They tightened their own export controls on these critical minerals, and that has caused real, painful disruptions for American automotive and aerospace manufacturing. We're not just talking about political posturing here. This is literally halting American factory lines. So at the summit, Washington desperately wants these shipments back on track, while Beijing wants the U.S. chip restrictions dialed back. It is a classic standoff.
Okay, next up, number 3, the tariff tug-of-war.
Let's talk trade, because President Trump has made it very clear this will be the central focus of his trip. Over the last few years, we've watched this crazy economic escalation that has driven up prices all over the world. It was a classic tit-for-tat spiral. Trump imposed tariffs, China hit back with their own, and it escalated so much that tariffs on some goods actually blasted past 100%. It threw global supply chains into absolute chaos. Now, we did get a temporary truce recently over in South Korea. China agreed to buy more U.S. agricultural goods, like soybeans, and the U.S. rolled back some of the steepest tariffs. But those underlying frictions? Oh, they are still very much alive and sitting right there on the negotiation table.
Let's look at the fourth critical issue, the Iran oil connection.
Stepping away from just economics for a second, we have a deeply volatile global security situation. Check this out. A whopping 80% of Iran's shipped crude oil exports are bought by China. They are Iran's absolute biggest customer. And to put that into perspective for China, about half of their total crude oil imports come straight from the Middle East. That means any disruption in the Gulf is a direct, immediate threat to China's energy supply and its whole economy.
Washington knows exactly how much financial leverage Beijing has over Tehran right now.
Security expert Dan Grazier pointed out that Trump is absolutely going to try and enlist Xi Jinping to use that economic weight to pressure Iran into a settlement. The U.S. is extremely motivated to secure the Strait of Hormuz. It's a vital global energy route, and lately, commercial shipping there has been incredibly vulnerable to attacks and major delays.
But here is where it gets really interesting. Gregory Poling from CSIS points out that sure, China wants stable shipping routes for its oil, obviously. But the diplomatic humiliation and the strategic pressure of those shipping disruptions, that actually falls way heavier on Washington than it does on Beijing. The U.S. has traditionally played the role of global policeman guaranteeing security in those waters. So while both sides want open shipping lanes, Beijing probably isn't going to just blindly follow Washington's playbook when it comes to dealing with Tehran.
Now we hit Section 5, Taiwan's existential stakes.
This is arguably the most fiercely contested issue they'll discuss. The divide here is just night and day. Beijing firmly claims the self-ruled island as its own territory. They've been dialing up the military pressure with regular naval and air drills, and they are highly critical of Taiwan's president, William Lai. Meanwhile, the U.S. officially recognizes the mainland, but, and it's a massive but, they are legally committed to helping Taiwan defend itself. Washington even recently approved an $11 billion military package for the island. So Beijing is demanding an end to U.S. arms sales, while Taipei is watching nervously, terrified of being used as a bargaining chip in some grand U.S.-China trade deal.
Every single word uttered by Trump and Xi about defense and arms sales is going to be put under a microscope. Will Trump sound vague about future support? Will he double down? Professor Salvatore Santino Regilme puts it perfectly. In great power politics, small words often carry large consequences, especially for those whose survival depends on the credibility of others. For Taiwan, the exact phrasing that comes out of this Beijing summit isn't just politics, it is literally a matter of existential survival.
Besides trade, rare earths, and Taiwan, they actually have a few more heavy topics on the docket. They're expected to tackle prominent human rights issues, notably the case of Jimmy Lai, the pro-democracy Hong Kong media tycoon, jailed under Beijing's national security law. And on top of all that, they'll be discussing the skyrocketing global risks tied to artificial intelligence. It's this total wild card threat that both countries are racing to master, but at the same time, they urgently need to figure out how to safely contain it so it doesn't spiral out of control.
Finally, Section 6, Defining Summit Success. When you put all these wildly complex puzzle pieces together, what does a win actually look like? Well, it depends entirely on whose shoes you're in. For President Trump, it's all about optics and deals. With midterm elections creeping up, he needs highly visible, easy-to-sell economic wins for the voters. Think massive Chinese agricultural purchases or getting those rare earth exports flowing again. For President Xi, success is all about prestige and stability. He needs economic predictability to keep things running smoothly at home, and he needs to be recognized globally as an equal power, all without looking like he's caving to American demands. Because those goals are so wildly different, most experts think a massive, fix-everything grand bargain is pretty unlikely. We're probably looking at a limited agreement just to keep a lid on the rivalry for now.
And that brings us right back to the paradox we started with. I want to leave you with this question to really chew on. If these two economies remain so heavily mutually dependent, how long can they actually survive treating each other as the ultimate strategic danger? They are tied together by billions of dollars but totally divided by military, tech, and ideological competition. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Definitely keep your eyes on the news because the decisions made in Beijing this week are going to ripple across the entire globe.